Welcome to this week's episode of What's at Stake. I'm your host, Kevin Madden, and I'm a senior partner here at Penta. Today, I'm joined by Wes Turbeville. He's the senior vice president at ID.me, overseeing the company's work with federal partners, where their focus is verifying and protecting Americans' identities online. ID.me is the next generation digital identity network that simplifies how individuals securely prove their identity. Wes, welcome to the pod.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me.
So Wes, to start, can you just take a moment to explain what ID.me does and why digital identity is so important?
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. And it's a great place to start. So ID.me, as you mentioned, is a secure digital identity network. And the big question is, well, what is that? What does that mean? And what we are is a network of 127 million users, 57 million of whom have been verified, had their identity verified up to a high level of assurance, who can use those accounts to access over 600 different organizations across public and private sector as a part of the ID.me network. And so the way I like to think about your ID.me account is that it's a digital wallet. And in that digital wallet, you can put a wide range of things. You can put identity documents. You can put things that show your attributes or your community affiliation. And then you can strip friction out of your digital life by going and asserting those credentials anywhere within the ID.me network.
So why do you think the discussion about digital identity right now is such a timely one?
That's a great question. And this is one of my favorite topics because it is incredibly timely right now. Two big things that digital identity can do when it's done right are, number one, stop fraud, and number two, increasing access and participation in the digital economy, and particularly for underserved populations. And so the way I like to think about it is that this is a really unique moment for digital identity and digital identity technology, particularly portable ones like ID.me. And here, these are, ID.me is redefining exactly how Americans are interacting with their government and with companies and everything across their digital life. Prior to ID.me, digital identity was either trusted or portable, but not both. So you could take some of your social logins and use them lots of places, but you wouldn't trust them in the same way that you would your work or your bank login, but you might not want to take that work or that bank login portable. And so enter ID.me, and what we're trying to fix in the market is to be that first trusted and portable digital identity and essentially be the last password you ever need in your life. And the way we think about it is you can verify your identity once with ID.me and then have frictionless access anywhere in the network. And what that looks like today is, as I mentioned, there's over 57 million people that have a high assurance credential with ID.me, which means they've had their identity verified to a high level of assurance and confidence that Wes is Wes or that Kevin is Kevin. And these are veterans who are logging into the VA to manage their benefits. They're unemployed workers who are going to state workforce agencies to make insurance claims. They are patients accessing health records. They are taxpayers filing their taxes electronically online for free this year for the first time through the IRS. And so, what I'd love to do is spend a little bit of time today talking about, why this is important and how it can unlock benefits. And I think what a lot of people aren't aware of is that when you do portable digital identity right, the benefits take a lot of different forms.
Yeah.
We talk about fraud a lot, but we can also increase access, particularly for underserved populations. We can streamline the customer experience because people don't have to repeat verification activities over and over again. There's operational efficiencies because organizations can move more users through digital channels. And there's also increased privacy because you don't have to go around hoovering up somebody's information in order to be able to verify their identity.
Well, Wes, I think a lot of people learn about these type of technologies and learn about why they need these type of services when they learn about it by hearing about bad things. And there have been a lot of public data breaches out there. What do people need to know who are learning about it through that lens? And how does ID.me help prevent that?
No, that is a fantastic question because you're really getting at the heart or at the root of the problem, Kevin. And so, there's been a lot of large data breaches over the last decade. A lot of people have been involved with them. I mean, I know personally, I've been involved in a couple across both public and private sector. So, AT&T, Equifax, 23andMe, Office of Personnel Management with a lot of records about government employees, people with security clearances, et cetera. And so what you've got is easily available personal information on the web. And then recently, you've also got this emergence of generative AI, where now it becomes much easier to take that stolen information, create a compelling job or romance scam, and be really targeted about going after a specific individual or victim to try to get them to, give up more of their personal information or partake in an activity that ends up being fraudulent. And so, what we see is that, scams are on the rise. Gone are the days of the, prince writing you, telling you that he needs money to get back into the American, back into the US. And they're very realistic. They're much more sophisticated. And so we're at this pivotal moment where more people are accessing services online, but they also have to do more to be able to protect themselves and protect their identities online. And that's where ID.me steps in, with our unique model of, what we call portable identity, our unique model of being able to leverage best in breed algorithms and back them up with what we call, human relief valves or human alternatives to get people through the verification process, but then also support them over the full life cycle of their digital identity needs, is where, we apply best in breed algorithms and that human touch to be able to support people.
What do you think are the biggest changes right now that you're seeing, either with regard to technology or with regard to user consumer behavior, that's affecting the digital identity landscape?
Yeah. See all of the above.
All of the above.
So, let me take a moment just to talk about, digital services and what the pandemic has actually done. My previous employer, McKinsey & Company, estimated that the share of consumer interactions on digital platforms jumped from 41% to 65% at the start of the pandemic. And if you double click into that and look how it changed across sectors, public sector saw an even higher jump, where that rate of interaction online reached 90% by April of 2021. And so what you've got is this massive migration of services that were traditionally delivered in person, and in 3D in real life, and they've moved into digital channels. And at the same time, you had, these services coming online, and you also had a lot of benefits programs that were being stood up to help reach people in need during the pandemic. And so the best way to deliver benefits at large scale is to do so through digital channels. And so that sort of made a ripe target for fraudsters. And so what you see is fraud rings began to emerge, both domestically and overseas, specifically targeting benefits programs that grew out of the pandemic. And what I would say is that fraud of that nature isn't new, but it rapidly accelerated during the pandemic. And one of the biggest indicators of this and enablers of this is actually identity theft. And so the FTC reported in 2020 that identity theft linked to benefits increased by over 2,920%. So that is a 30-fold increase in identity theft. Huge. And this is a problem that, we see as being here to stay. And so some of the language that you'll hear us say at ID.me is, the pandemic might be fading, but fraud is not. And I can talk through, maybe in a little bit, I can talk through some specific examples of what that looks like.
And you're probably in this constant state of updating the technology, updating protocols, learning what the newest, latest change is coming from some of the bad actors out there that are involved in identity theft, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this goes
vigilance must be a huge part of your job.
That is exactly right. Vigilance is one word we use. Whack-a-mole is another word that we use. And then if you've ever seen the movie World War Z,
right?
Thinking about like this, the zombies coming over the wall is exactly how fraud feels like sometimes, right? And so, just as an interesting statistic, fraud is a business, right? It gets into supply and demand, and they are smart in how they actually reinvest in their business. And so what we see, what research has pointed at is that some of these fraud rings that are overseas and also some of the ones domestically reinvest about 30% of their income back in research and development efforts, right? And so that puts them on par with research intense industries like the defense industry or pharmaceuticals in terms of how much income goes back into R&D. So that goes to show you how serious they are about improving the way they conduct, their business. And so, I think everybody on this call or listening is probably familiar with Chat GPT, but have you ever heard of Worm GPT or Fraud GPT, where there's actually tools that are being built on top of these open source technologies that are being purpose built specifically to create fraud? And the crazy thing about this is the subscriptions, they are pay for subscriptions, they are fraudsters, are businessmen, are actually less than most of our cell phone bills. So between the tools being cheap to access, the tools getting better with time, it means that we have to be really vigilant, to use your word, to stay ahead of how the attack vectors are emerging. And so we do that with an amazing team today. We have pretty sophisticated, capabilities across, identifying fraud, stopping fraud, deploying controls, et cetera, and we can move quickly to stay ahead of them. But one of the key parts about stopping this fraud is that, it takes what we consider to be a network to stop a network. And so this is one of the advantages of how IDME operates today, where I mentioned, the users in our network, but we support 16 federal agencies, 40 state agencies, across 30 states, and almost 600 private sector entities. And so we get fraud signals from across all of those entities, where if there's something happening over in one agency at the state level, we can take a look at it. And if we think it's affecting other agencies, we can immediately deploy controls that stop fraud in other parts of the network. And so the ability to synthesize signals from across all the different nodes and to move quickly on controls is what helps us, succeed at the game of whack-a-mole, and stay vigilant.
Yeah. So I wanted to dive a little deeper on that. How does IDME and how do you work with government agencies on a regular basis to adapt to these threats?
Yeah. I think the key here is public-private partnership, where, there's a lot of trust that agencies put in IDME, to put us on the front door. The beauty of that is it can unlock a lot in terms of inclusive access, improvements in customer experience, and operational efficiencies. But also what comes with that is a high level of trust that we're going to be able to stop the fraud that comes after some of these agencies. And so the best way to do that is in close collaboration. And so we regularly work very closely with fraud functions within departments, or within agencies, both at the state and the federal level. If they see things, they let us know. If we see things, we let them know. And then we also share insights across the network. So if we see a pattern of behavior, in one particular type of program, we can proactively reach out to other programs and say, hey, this is what we're seeing in another part of our network. Are you seeing this? And they'll say, hey, we haven't looked, but let us go check. And then it's through that constant engagement and constant collaboration with our fraud team that we are able to stay, ahead of a lot of the emerging threats.
But you're in a very unique situation here in that you have the customer and you're thinking about, like a lot of businesses say, we're very customer centric, but the customer here is also the taxpayer.
Yeah, that's right. And so we do have to protect, we obviously protect the individuals themselves. The way we think about it is we build our trust, we build our business on trust and convenience. And in order to have that trust, we have to protect people, individuals' information with, one, respect for their privacy, and then two, the absolute best in cybersecurity controls. And so when it comes to privacy, we're what we consider to be a consent-driven organization. And so as a user, after a user verifies their identity and they have their digital wallet, before we'll share any of their information with a government agency or with an organization in the private sector, we always ask for their consent. And so the user will see a consent screen that says, we're about to share this information, these fields. Would you like us to do that? And the user agrees, and then we send the information over. And so what's really powerful about that too is at any time a user can go into account.id.me and they can see exactly what information we shared with whom, when. And that's a level of transparency that I think a lot of people don't realize exists in the market. And then certainly a lot of credit bureau and data broker driven solutions, don't offer their users. And so, first and foremost, we put privacy first. Second, we put, we take security seriously. And so what I mean by that is our products today have a FedRAMP moderate authority to operate that gets audited every time we go live with a new federal agency. We do have what we consider to be the trifecta of security credentials. So after FedRAMP, we've also got a SOC 2 Type 2, and then also an audit against ISO 27001, 2013, which is focused on information management systems.
So Wes, what you just said sounded like you just delivered a play inside an NFL huddle with lots of different terminology and words that people don't understand. But I think if anybody who's out there and understands federal standards and understands how important it is to have very high standards with regards to fraud and privacy and security, can you walk us through a little bit of exactly what those terms mean and why having an organization, having a company like ID.me that meets these very high federal standards is so important for the consumer experience?
So that's a great question. And let me actually talk a little bit about history for a second and how we got here today. And probably one of the most important of those acronyms, which is NIST and NIST's identity verification policy,
which is the National Institute.
And so NIST is a part of the Department of Commerce, which is it's the National Institute for Standards and Technology.
Right.
It's a part of the Department of Commerce. And what they are is an organization of some of our country's smartest engineers who, are paid to, or who exist to essentially write standards and guidelines using their best independent engineering assessment of, what is best for a particular topic.
But this is like the essentially the gold standard.
Yep. And so when it comes to digital identity, a lot of the products that we build today are designed to meet the standards or the guidelines that are published by NIST, and the gold standard of which for a high-risk transaction online is something that they call Identity Assurance Level 2, or IAL2 for short. And what IAL2 is a guideline that's written by NIST, and it's a bar for the amount of evidence that you need to collect on somebody to make sure that it is in fact Kevin or it is in fact Wes. And just a little bit of history on IAL2, because it's been around since 2017. And the reason why it came about is because with the data breaches that you mentioned earlier, and the fact that, I can go on the dark web today and I can buy a social security number for somewhere between free and $2. People's PII and information is out there and it's available. And so the old way we used to do identity verification is I would ask you some questions. And if you knew the information, then I could reasonably assume that you were the person whose information that belongs to. And the data breaches that happened made it so that anybody could have that information. And there's a company called Pindrop that does call center authentication. And what they found is that fraudsters get knowledge-based verification questions correct 92% of the time, but legitimate users only get them right 46% of the time.
That's amazing. It's that high.
Yeah. So you've got fraudsters knowing twice as much about you as you do, which is terrifying. But, NIST and GAO, the Government Accountability Office, took a look at this and said, okay, guys, knowledge-based verification is just not going to work anymore in this environment. And so they went and they sat down and they said, okay, what's a more secure way that we need to do this? And so they wrote some guidelines about how you collect evidence on somebody and how you reach what you call the gold standard, IAL2, in order to be able to interact with an individual in a high-risk transaction. And what I mean by high-risk transaction is think about, the sensitivities around sharing health information or tax information or paying a benefit. Anytime there's a lot of sensitivity or a lot of value attached to a transaction, there's also a lot of risk to it, and that's what a fraudster will target. And so NIST set the bar, pretty high with an IAL2 for those high-risk transactions. But then they also afforded a little bit of flexibility where if you have a lower risk transaction, you might not need as high of a bar for verification.
But the educated consumer should really be paying attention to whether or not a service like ID.me or any service that they're about to use for digital identity purposes, that they reach that high standard.
That's right. Not just users. Users should look for it, right? But then also government agencies. And so one of the things that we've seen recently, I mentioned earlier that we see the pandemic is fading, but the fraud is not. One of the reasons we see that is that some states that we protected during the pandemic that adopted NIST IAL2 to protect unemployment claims have moved away from IAL2. And almost overnight, fraudsters saw that and they recognized it and they began hammering those states. And so you can look at it in the news, but some of these states can see a third of their claims being fraudulent, or 65% of their claims held up because they're not sure who's fraudulent and who's not. And so we feel very strongly that the threshold and the first step you should take to protect high risk benefits is to adopt those NIST standards, and to not compromise on that. State agencies that have compromised get hammered, and we see some of them migrating back to those NIST standards, because the fraud is out there, it's real, and it's getting worse with Gen AI.
Let me get into a question that I should have asked earlier, and that's about customer habits and people's different levels of proficiency with technology. More and more people are going to start using these type of services. More and more people have to shift from doing it in person to doing things online. How do you address some of the equity issues with that transition? People who may not be as comfortable with technology, but they don't want to get left out of the transformation that's taking place right now. Everything from how they do their banking to how they get their healthcare to how they buy products. What's IDMe's view of addressing that equity issue?
No, that is a fantastic question, because I know we've been talking a lot about security. And I think there's a lot of urban myths out there that you have to make a trade between security and inclusive access. And our view is that agencies can actually have both, without compromise. And the reason why we believe that is because we've been seeing it and we've been living it. There's been a couple of federal agencies that have come out and credited us with doubling access rates to their online services. And not only did we double access rates, but we also migrated them from an antiquated lower security policy into a higher security policy at the same time. And what's amazing is when you double click into those increased access rates of 2x, what you see is that for certain underserved demographics, the gain is actually 3 times. And I'll take users from Puerto Rico as a great example. So during the pandemic, people from Puerto Rico were eligible for federal benefits for the first time, new types. And so that also meant that they had to file federal returns for the first time. And so what you saw was a large volume of users from Puerto Rico accessing federal agencies' websites for the first time, and then needing to verify their identities to a high level of assurance because they were engaging in sensitive transactions. And under the legacy way of doing things, people from Puerto Rico who are, as a population, have 1/3 the median income of the overall US population. They're primarily Spanish speaking. There's a lot of rural, and some studies say they're up to 7 times more likely to be unbanked. These are users that have a hard time verifying their identity online. And so in the legacy way of doing things, which were powered by credit bureaus and data brokers, where it was algorithms only, their pass rate was around 24%. But with IDMe, because we offered them alternative ways to verify their identity, their pass rates were upwards of around 80% at the time. And this was looked at closely in 2022. But they've just continued to rise as we continue to learn more about our populations and improve things with our products. And so what you've got is a tripling of access rates for people from Puerto Rico. And as you take a step back and you look across other demographic groups across the US, you see that same story unfolding for different groups, people who are low income, et cetera. And so we've studied this pretty closely with our equity and analytics engine, which is something that allows us to essentially look at how different demographics perform coming through our platform. And one of the things that's really interesting is as you look at how we're able to do that and how we're able to deliver those results, the most important thing is that we meet people where they are. We give them options and we give them control over their journeys. And so the way we think about digital equity and the way we define it is just a recognition that not everybody starts from the same place. You talked about different digital capabilities, different environments, different upbringings, different levels of familiarity with technology, different access to broadband. So everybody starts from a different place. But what we see is that under those legacy methods, with credit bureaus and data brokers, the part of the population that they tend to leave behind the most are people who are low income. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau talks about 45 million people either having thin, incorrect, unscorable credit, et cetera. And so if you were to look at access rates to online services by income levels in the US, what you actually see is the lower the income level, the harder it is to get online. And that was prior to ID.me. But because we offer users multiple options by which to verify their identity, because of the way we've built our platform with some redundancy and algorithms that have been tested by the government, because we continuously look at these feedback loops and continuously improve our product, and because we have humans in the loop at multiple steps to help users through their journey, we can close about 75% of the digital divide for low-income users that's left by credit bureaus and data brokers.
And is there a bigger long-term effect there too, in the sense that once somebody is verified and they go through these steps, that it has a much bigger transformative effect on how they've used the internet going forward, how they are able to now use that digital wallet for other services?
No, you have absolutely hit the nail on the head. So going back to those people from Puerto Rico,
right,
they verify their identity at one agency, but now they've unlocked access to many other agencies. And so instead of having to repeat a cumbersome verification process at each new agency, they're able to move anywhere in the ID.me network and assert their credentials to access other benefits. And what we see in our network is that regardless of the way in which you verify, once you're in the network, the level of activity is consistent. And so what this means is, if there's somebody who came through like a video chat pathway because they couldn't get through on an algorithm pathway, once they're in the network, they're just as active. And so that person who couldn't get through algorithms would have struggled at many other agencies. And in the old way of doing things, might have only been able to engage in, one or two online services. But now with us,
did you find that, which is that in previous instance where in previous opportunities or engagements where they encountered so much friction that it just became a huge barrier, and that's
right. And we've torn that down, and then we've made it so that it's not just a one-time story for them. They can access, lots of different types of benefits at the state and the federal level.
So Blake Hall, the CEO of ID.me, he often talks about creating what he calls the internet's digital fast lane, so that ID.me is the last login a user or customer will ever need. What's a good summary of the company's vision for the road ahead for this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, it's to not have passwords. One thing that we are doing is, passkeys, web authentication are technologies that are more emerging that can streamline the experience even more. And those are something that we're adopting and advancing every day. But I think if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, I think what we're marching towards is a future where, you've got a handful of digital wallets, right? And I think if you listen to other podcasts that Blake talks about this, some of the front runners are, things that can be on your device, something that's device agnostic like ID.me, or Clear is another good example of an organization that's got potential to be a big digital wallet. But once you have the digital wallet and you're comfortable with it, the utility increases to you, the more things that you can add into it, and the more places that you can use it in your digital life. And so if you think about, like, I'll take an example of myself as a Navy veteran. In my ID.me wallet, I've got my digital identity, but then I've also got my veteran verification. And so anytime I'm logging into websites that need to see that I'm a veteran, I'm able to assert that. But imagine a world where, if I could have my health insurance card or my children's health insurance card in my wallet, how easy that would make the registration process every time I go to check my daughters in for, a medical appointment. Imagine a world where I could also enable movement of my medical records as I move from a specialist to my primary care physician, to an emergency room at a local hospital. Imagine what happens if I can move those records seamlessly with the same digital wallet. And so as the network is built and everybody has their digital wallet, and we continue to add features and use cases behind it, it just continues to strip friction out of people's lives. And so thinking about digital wallets being as ubiquitous as your physical wallets is something that is a future that I think we're marching towards. And I think ID.me is in an amazing pole position, just given the size of our network today and the number of use cases that we serve.
So Wes, any other closing thoughts for our listeners, especially those that are wondering how they can protect themselves going forward?
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. I think first and foremost, the word you mentioned, protection, is absolutely key. So first and foremost, protecting consumers' information, it takes a coordinated effort across public and private sector entities. Fraudsters are coordinated and they operate as a network. And so the only way you're going to beat them is if you operate as a network. And so public-private partnerships are really important to this. I think the second thing about protection is that it's a team sport and it's an all-in sport. And what I mean by that is consumers also have to think about their digital wallets and their online digital identities in the same way they think about their physical wallets. And with the same care and protection that you would take to protect your physical wallet or your purse, you should think about protecting your digital wallet. So things like not sharing any of your information with strangers, being skeptical if somebody reaches out to you with a deal that's too good to be true, because it probably is. And certainly never giving your information to a stranger. And then if there is a job or romance scam, do what you can to validate that the person you're talking to on the other end is in fact a legitimate user or a legitimate site. And so I think it really takes a team sport to protect a user, protect their credential, and make sure that their information stays as safe as possible.
So that's good to know that we have ID Me as the guardian on that wall, protecting consumers and their digital identities. Wes, I want to thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
And to our listeners, remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter at Penta Group, which is PENTAGRP, and on LinkedIn at Penta Group. I'm your host, Kevin Madden. And as always, thanks for listening to What's at Stake. We'll see you next time.